The Bible. Is it hard to understand?
When it comes to reading the Bible, the first thing that comes to mind is the fact that this is the Word of God.
The seals have been broken, and the truth is here.
And when we go throughout the scriptures, when we go throughout extra biblical records, we find that the language that God employed, that He used to create the heavens and the earth, was the Hebrew language.
Christ said, I came for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. But yet no one, no religious leader, no religious church out there anywhere can now identify the 12 tribes of Israel. Can we? God is quite simple, but it seems as if man makes understanding Him hard.
What are those mysteries?
The truth of your book and the truth will make you free. The Hebrew and Bible Academy. You're invited. Shalom, brothers and sisters. Welcome to our weekly Patreon update. Blessings.
The East is where we're from.
We're from the East, the 12 tribes of Israel.
The 12 tribes of Israel.
Shalom, shalom.
In 721 BC, the Assyrian king, he took us down, we fell. With the great escape we
Shalom, shalom.
Euphrates, the Lord held the waters still.
To a land where no mankind dwelt.
To a land where no mankind dwelt, we went.
Our forefathers.
The 12 tribes of Israel.
That's who we be.
Manasseh, the Cubans, Ephraim from Puerto Rico, Naphtali from the Isles of Hawaii. The Lord is calling back Israel. Zebulun from Panama, Gad, the North American Indians, Simeon, the Dominicans, our highest gathering Israel.
Yes, our highest gathering Israel. Yes, I'm Elder Ricard of the Gathered of Christ Church here with our weekly update, for Patreon. Blessing to all of our brothers and sisters throughout the four corners of the earth. All praises be to the Most High, Ahaya, Ashar, Ahaya, in the name of Yeshua. I hope you all are having a blessed day, right? Jumping right in, we have some serious things to talk about today on Patreon, the sacrifice of our children. Of course, I titled it a little different. I gave it a different title for the YouTube update, The War Against Our Children. And a lot of us don't even understand how we got here, right? How do we get here? Where now, really parents have no control or say so over the behaviors of our children at this point, where parents dread the moment that they'll allow our children out in society. It wasn't like when I was growing up, right? You dread the moment that your children are no longer under your power. How do they take the power from parents? That and more is what we're going to be discussing on Patreon. And we're going to quantify it with the words of the Most High. Before I go there, I'm going to show you what we'll be diving into it at Patreon, all right? But before I go there, let me tell all my Patreon members, the Patreonies out there, all right? Let me give you some understanding of what's going on with the Patreon. If you're using the Patreon app on your phone, delete the Patreon or not the Patreon. If you're using the Vimeo app, Okay, if you're using the Vimeo app for Patreon, delete the Vimeo app. Okay. All right. I have it right here. AC gave me the insight on what's going on with the technical issues on Patreon side. I have my tech guy on the phone. AC.
Yes, sir.
So you said that the brothers and sisters from Patreon was having an issue. What was their issue there? What was the issue?
The issue is that if you have if you're using your mobile phone and
Yeah.
you have the Vimeo app installed,
The Vimeo app.
yes, you need to uninstall the Vimeo app, and that should prevent the message that states that you're not authorized to view
Okay.
the video.
Thank you. So if they get rid of the Vimeo app, they'll be able to watch Patreon with no issues.
Yes, sir.
All right, I appreciate that. All right. Well, Shalom. That's right. My brother in Christ from the DMV area deal with all our tech issues, and a lot of you were frustrated with Patreon. Why? Because you was using the Vimeo app. Delete the Vimeo app and just use the link we send to you through Patreon. View it through Patreon without dealing with the Vimeo app, and everything should go fine for you. So I wanted to say that first and foremost. And Patreon is a little different than YouTube, folks. All right. So you just can't go to Patreon, click on the link and see the broadcast. All right. If you go to Patreon, once you're on the Patreon, of course, you must have a Patreon account. Make sure you hit the play button. The play button and the unmute button so you can see and hear the broadcast, the weekly Patreon updates, okay? So I just wanted to make sure that your technical issues are clear. Let's dive in for this particular update. Update, all right? And then after that, I have a few announcements, and then we'll just transition over to Patreon. Fair use. The war against our children. The war against our children. Fair use. Fair use. Did I say fair use already? The war against our children. How many of you had speculated that something is going on with this news story here? And how did we get here?
Some breaking news off the top. Hundreds of
How
teens
did we get
flooding
here?
into downtown Chicago tonight, smashing car windows, trying to get into Millennium Park, prompting a major police response. Within the past few minutes, shots were fired near the corner of Madison and Michigan. Now, we had a news crew on the scene, but they had to move because of safety concerns. I was there a little bit earlier, about an hour and a half ago, and saw police escorting tourists and visitors to their cars in the Millennium Park parking garage. The crowd was trying to get into Millennium Park, but their checkpoint.
Oh, yeah. How many of you brothers and sisters wonder why they're highlighting this chaos of inner city children operating in packs, raiding and stealing and pillaging in plain sight? Why do you think they're publicizing this, folks? Folks, no one wants to discuss the underlying issue of how we got here. But at the end of the day, Chicago, the Biden administration, are now looking at a resolution or a resolve to stop things like this from happening instead of dealing with the core root issues. What drives children into criminality? What drives them into protesting and really rebelling against society? Well, folks, of course we know the answer. Of course there's an answer. The Bible talks about this. how the Gentile nations, and this is why our God, the God of Israel, began to punish the children of Israel. The Gentile nations were known in ritual sacrifice. They were known to give up their children to the priesthood of Moloch. Now, what I'm saying is above a lot of others' heads out here, especially in our communities, who have no idea who Moloch is. Very rarely you see the people in our community reading the Old Testament. But you have to realize what's before you right here. I need y'all to look at this. This is the biblical premise we're examining. And this was a governmental premise. This wasn't just some isolated cult. The governments of the earth had a priesthood that could only continue if, that's right, children were groomed into the priesthood of Moloch. Whether or not it be them going to the preschools, like we have universities to actually take over the positions for the priests who would die. They had to keep replenishing the priesthood. So the citizens of that particular nation or country had to make sure they severed out a certain number of children to keep the priesthood of Moloch going. All right. Also, there was some children who was offered in sacrifice altogether. People are wondering why these children are going ape, mad, crazy in our society. Could it be that they were engineered to do this? Under the Moloch sacrifice, under the Moloch ritualistic governance of the world? So how did we get here? Let's talk about it. Yeah, altar boys, y'all got it. They also have a faction of so-called altar boys, believe it or not, called something else that comes up under the imams in the religion, under the religion Islam. Also, the Buddhist monks and how the children are initiated into that. Y'all think it's about martial arts, folks. It's an initiation. But our people, Hosea 4:6 say, our people are destroyed for a lack of knowledge. So how did we get here as a people? Well, how did we get here? Right? Well, this is how we got here. And how does this connect to the LGBTQ movement, one might ask? Well, there's a thing in our community, I would say, an open secret in our community, where if our parents go to social workers and others with a problemed child, it's incentivized. It's actually incentivized if we go to the social workers, which I believe allegedly are part of the cabal under Satan. Knowingly or unknowingly, they're working for a satanic system. If you go to the system with a problem child, there's an open secret in our community that you are incentivized by allowing them to treat your child. That's an open secret. We call it little things. We always put our own slang on it, right? Growing up, we would call it, oh, we know she's getting that crazy check, right? Or my child is dealing with this issue, that issue. I got to take that child to treatment because he was diagnosed and the social worker told me this or told me that, just so that we can actually explain off the fact without being blamed. Explain why you are getting all this money by giving up your child. But that's right. You have to do it with some level of justification. But the Bible highlights what this is. The Bible highlights this, right? Let's read it real quick before I transition over in a couple of seconds. The Bible gives us insight to this. See, as long as the social worker through psychology. That's why you have to watch these people with psychology degrees. Okay, how they can flip words and convince you into your own demise. Usually they go into the social realm to convince our people to actually do what they would normally reject. Well, in the book of Leviticus, folks, it states, Leviticus 18:21 reads, "And thou shalt not let any of thy seed," that's your family, that's your bloodline, "pass through the fire to Moloch. Neither shalt thou profane the name of thy God. I am the Lord." And then right after that, check this out. Now, a lot of people don't even realize why right after this verse, it goes into the alternative lifestyle. "Thou shalt not lie with mankind as with womankind. It is an abomination." No one reading the Old Testament out there critically have examined why, didn't understand why the 22nd verse went into the act of homosexuality right after your seed passing through the fire to Moloch. Well, folks, all of those children weren't killed to Moloch. A lot of them were given over into the priesthood and practiced sex magic. Okay? Opening up a whole nother realm of sin by ritualistic sexual behaviors adverse against nature as a part of the priesthood. As a part of the priesthood. And no one out there have been putting two and two together. That when you pass through the fire, when you operate under Moloch, there's activity, sinful activity. Folks, that sinful activity is a part of the initiation into the Moloch brotherhood so that they can hold things over you. And through that activity, it opens your body up to what? Open your soul up to spirits. So now you're utilized as a host. So how did we get here? How were they able to socially engineer this Moloch sacrifice and make it a norm into our communities? Well, it starts off, like I mentioned earlier, with what we call in our neighborhoods crazy checks. Not realizing we were handing our children over. So-called Dr. Umar Johnson was talking about when he was working in the charter school in Philadelphia. He was talking about how there was an inordinate number of black children in the community, right, being diagnosed with ADHD and all these others. We didn't realize it. It came out of nowhere. When I was growing up, the only special ed was what was deemed mental retardation. When I was growing up, but when my sons and others was growing up, there was a boom in the community in which parents were being convinced in the school by child psychologists that something was mentally wrong with their children. And of course, a parent being alarmed, not trusting the system, you're going to do everything they are suggesting to help your child progress and learn. Right? Right? It's enough that we're already behind other people when it comes to this rat race called life. So when you tell a parent that something is mentally wrong with a child, you don't want that disadvantage, and you think the school knows better, not realizing that allegedly you may be talking to a priest or priestesses of Moloch, someone who works in a witch coven, someone who operates with a pagan cult group, who have now filled out applications to teach in the inner cities. See? So you go along with this believing that the schools have our best interest at heart. And what happens? What happens? Your child get a diagnosis and all of a sudden it's a win-win because why? It's hard to make ends meet. On top of you agreeing with the treatment for your child, you are now getting a check that no one knows about to help ends meet. A win-win. You're allowing your child to be open to whatever that gateway opens. And for a short-term fix when it comes to a few dollars that month, not realizing the long-term consequences. So what I did was, I went to one of the main drugs that they came to me about when it came to my son years ago. They came to me and told me my son had an attention issue. And, it so happened, it could have been a coincidence, but inner city, Philadelphia, West Philadelphia, a lesbian principal, a black woman, lesbian. I'm working for a Fortune 500 company at this time in 2006. My son in middle school, right? He's about to go to middle school. And they call me and tell me that I need to come from work or take some time off to come and to speak to the child psychologist. It was a black lesbian who was the principal. I'm just telling you, this is what it was. I don't have nothing against, as long as she can be any business she want, as long as, she don't tell me what to do with my seed. And we made sure no holidays, none of that crap y'all do in pagan world. Do not influence my son with it. He's there for his ABCs, 1, 2, 3s. But then I'm speaking to this gay man who's a child psychologist telling me that gay white guy in the inner city telling me that he believed that it'll help my son if my son take pills. He says, my son is a little hyper. He's active and all that. I'm like, listen here, man. I'm going to talk to you straight. Don't you ever talk about putting my son on anything. Okay? Because when I was growing up, I was hyper. Okay? When I was growing up, I was overactive because that's how boys operate. Now, and I told him straight up. He was a white gay dude. I'm like, I don't know how you grew up, but that's normal for people. Don't you ever talk about. And then he gave me this list of drugs, but he kind of thought that I was somebody who would be willing to sacrifice my child for a check. So I'm the type of person, I wasn't going to react initially until all the details were explained. So I'm just listening to him. Look like he's fresh out of college for about 2-3 years. So he think he's smart with this ridiculous psychology degree. And I'm sitting there just look. He don't even understand who's in front of him. And he's speaking to me like I'm a 4-year-old. Well, your son, he's a little overactive. He's hyper. Sometimes he's angry, and sometimes when that happens, we look into whether or not there's something going on in the home, and I'm taking it all in, as if I'm agreeing. Okay, yeah, that's nice. That's nice. That's nice. And then he said, I believe that if we put him on this particular medication called Adderall, that it's going to take the angst away. Boy, was I waiting for the moment that he would ask for my response through his diatribe of verbal feces. I said, sir, let me make it clear to you. I don't know where you come from, but I like overactive boys. Because that's what it's about. I like that testosterone. I like my son being a real man. Don't you ever peddle some drugs to me, sir. Don't you ever threaten my son. What you mean threaten your son? You're threatening my son. Because you're trying to get into his mind. A child his age will have fear automatically going into a new school. He's still trying to find his lane. He's trying to figure out where he fits when it comes to peer pressure. The regular things that I grew up, that's right, naturally going through to become a man. Don't you dare seek to rob my son of that. He's going to be upset sometime. He's going to be overactive sometime until he finds his place in this world. And you're not going to get in the way of that, sir. That's a normal child. How many children you have put on this stuff? He got up out of there so quick. And, the black short lesbian principal came in afterwards. And tried to ask, why did I offend her psychologist? Or you speak. I'm like, listen, man, I'm a man, okay? So don't try to come up in here like you a man. Okay? So they're not going to send you in because I understand who really works for who. You work for him. And you're not going to convince me it's okay to sacrifice my child. But I digress. So what I did was I looked up the side effects for Adderall. And then I asked, how many of your children you would want to exhibit some of these side effects? Loss of appetite. Now, if my son have a loss of appetite and isn't eating right, you're going to come to me and claim that he's living in an unfit home. He's not being fed right. Weight loss, dry mouth, stomach upset, pain, nausea, vomiting, dizziness. How can you claim that you're helping my son concentrate when the medicine, when the so-called drug you're talking about putting him on will make him dizzy in school? Headache, diarrhea, fever, nervousness, trouble sleeping. I have to deal with my son being up all night and can't sleep because of this. May occur. If any of these effects get worse, tell your doctor promptly. And folks, look at what's going on here. This medication may raise your blood pressure. So you're going to tell me to put my child on this throughout his whole school years, only for after he's an adult to be diagnosed with high blood pressure? Now, if he's dizzy, disoriented, now there's other things. Tell your doctor right away if you have any of these serious side effects. Signs of blood flow problems, fingers or toes, coldness, numbness, pain. Look at this. Mental and mood behavior. So you're telling me my son have an issue and need to be on this Adderall, and now I have to deal with mood swings, him having behavior I don't understand, I can't understand. Aggression? Thoughts of suicide? So now let's get back.
Points that are not allowing anyone.
Let's
Some
get
breaking
back
news
to
off the top. Hundreds of teens flooding into downtown Chicago tonight, smashing car windows, trying to get into Millennium Park, prompting a major police response. Within the past few minutes, shots were fired near the corner of Madison and Michigan. Now
no one is asking how many of these children have been sacrificed to Moloch before the age of reason, the age that they were able to make decisions on their own. An age through ignorance, their parents drugged them up and handed them over to the Moloch system. Now we're looking at the criminality and all these others without going into what I seen happen one step at a time in the inner city. How they was able to separate the man from the child, convince the women to allow their children to be on stuff and for a check to supplement a man not being there. And now here's the result. And on top of that, I have to correct myself from Wednesday, because I did know about the homosexual manifesto. I went into that years ago, but I didn't know it as the Michael Swift manifesto. I had the homosexual manifesto and the Supreme Court rulings of it of 1987 on one of my old videos, 2014. It was 2017. I went into the homosexual manifesto. It was 2017 or 18. And because of the stringent YouTube rules, we had to take all of that down off of YouTube. So when you sacrifice your children over to Moloch, folks, and allow and listen to the system over God, eventually the dark side takes our children, where you'll have no more power over their decisions to direct them in the way of God, in the way of Christ. And then when you open it up with all these drugs and others, they'll begin to dabble into different lifestyles and all that. It's all a part of the agenda to weaken the minds of the children so that now they can do what? That's right, folks. They can pass laws to get to your children now in a time while they're developing. At a time in which they are, it's not about trying to get them on the drugs more so than taking their minds at the age of development, no sooner as they get in school, to have your child confused to what gender they are. And it's a part of the manifesto, and we're going to talk about that on Patreon. This is how we got here, folks. But no one have quantified it into a satanic ritual where you're actually initiating the whole society of the earth, pointing to the children into Molochian sacrifice. Now, the difference between now and the time of Moloch, the ancient times, well, the difference here, brothers and sisters, is the fact that parents would voluntarily give their children over to the government. They would voluntarily doing it at this time. But now they're tricking parents into doing it under the guise of helping the children. Oh, your child has this mental. That's why they want to swing and say, let's go into mental illness. Let's make mental illness a thing. Because the solution for mental illness is what? The pharmaceutical solution. And they got the mental ill in our schools telling us something is wrong with our children. We're going to talk about that and more. A couple of seconds, I'm going to open up the line because so many people calling me saying, I don't know what to do with my children, this, that, and the other. It seems like my children are going crazy. But folks, the Bible says, train up a child the way they should go, and when they're of age, they shall not depart from it. We have to take responsibility for what we've allowed in their impressionable growing years. We're listening to these others on the outside, not knowing their intentions, instead of following our conscience and saying, no, you're not going to convince me to do this, and I'm not going to do this. I'm going to sell my child out to Moloch for a crazy check because I love my child more than money. I love my child more than money. I'm not giving my child over to Moloch. Because eventually what happens, and guess what? Somebody needs to do some research on this. I wonder how many children that's used to coping on medication as a child transition into other drugs as they get older. We need to look into that too. Is there a connection between the two? Who knows? Could there be? Research need to be done there too. Because if you get a child practicing popping pills every day as the norm and being zoned out and dizzy and all these things, what's to prohibit them from trying other pills as an adult? But I digress. So I thought I would come on here. Usually I'm not on here this long for a Patreon update, but I had to tell y'all what we're going into because I want to talk to the parents on the other side of this on Patreon who's willing to, come clean and let's talk about it and say, I didn't know. I didn't realize it. What can we do now to fix some of this? They tricked us. They placed these people, in trusting positions of authority over education, over medicine. And we thought that these people had the best interests of our children at heart. But now we are here dealing with the fallout of our decisions. So we're going to talk about that. Before I talk about that, let me let you all know what's on the docket. I'm going to go through the Homosexual Manifesto on Patreon. But let me tell you what's on the docket for the Hebrew and Bible Academy. You don't want to miss this. For the first time, after week 12, Elder Lawyer and I, to prepare you for the test, which will actually be week 13, will be there for the Q&A to interact with you in preparation for your test. The first time that has ever happened in the Hebrew and Bible Academy. We're not going to let you out on your own on week 13 and take that as a place to rest, to get ready. We're going to take an hour and a half, and interact with you through video and phone so that you can ask any questions you would like to sum up your 12 weeks. For the first time, we're going to do this, and we're going to do this as appreciation for you all, and you'll also receive the PDF. We're going to give my PDF, the Pseudepigrapha of the Old Testament, both volumes. They belong to me, and I'm going to make sure you get those. And I'm going to also give you the order of the Bible when it comes to the extra biblical text and Bible, how to read the Word of God in chronological order. Okay? A lot of you don't know that the Old Testament, some of that isn't in chronological order. In what order do I read the Bible? Well, we'll give you that, and we're going to infuse the extra biblical text so you'll learn how to read in chronological order with no issue. One book to the next, including Jasher, Enoch, including the Pseudepigraphas of the Old Testament, also including the Apocrypha and New Testament. Everything will be in chronological order so you'll know how to read the Word from the beginning to the end in chronological order. That chart that was made specifically by the Gathering of Christ Church will belong to you. We're going to give you that too, okay? This particular weekend, this Sunday, we'll be talking about the origin of Israelites in America. The truth about the origin of Israelites in America, and is there witchcraft or sorcery within some of these sects, unbeknownst to those who are a part of it? Well, we're going to talk about that. Week 7, there will be a roundtable discussion Marriage, the battle between man and woman, a roundtable discussion. And I hope you all are there for that, because we're going to go into some of what we're talking about today. All right. And sometimes I'll tell you what happens. Sometimes we keep things secret. We don't want to be embarrassed, and we don't want to admit or have the shame that we did things wrong as parents. But the Bible says, confess our faults one to another, lest so that we can be healed. We can't hold ourselves in honor to hide our shame while our children suffer. That's backward. So we're going to have some of these discussions. And week 7, the roundtable discussion, how they were able, because they would have never been able to get to our children if they didn't first separate the man and the woman and turn man against woman and vice versa. They had to first do that, knowing that at the end game was to take our children in child sacrifice. Week 9, we're going to talk. Week 8, we're going to go into witches and warlocks, how to recognize a modern day witch or warlock. Allegedly, who knows? Maybe we need to look at whether or not Fauci and others are warlocks. Who knows? Allegedly. We need to look into that. What are their religion of choice? What is their religion of choice, outside of their profession? And does that impact how they practice their profession? See, you can't tell me being an Israelite following the law. It doesn't matter what profession I go into. What I believe will have an influence, will have an effect on how I do the job and what I do. So my belief cannot be separated from my profession in the workplace. Okay? It's impossible. So you have to understand what some of these people believe that we trust in these high positions. You have to know their religious persuasion. See? In order to trust their solutions. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about witches and warlocks. We're going to go into week 9, the truth about Sodom and Gomorrah. How really sexual perversions and sin and doing evil opens the soul so that individual can be a host for a Roman demon. This is how demons get hosts, through sin. So Sodom and Gomorrah wasn't just about the act of sin. If you were to see it in the spiritual world, when someone sinned against God's law, something opens in their spirit that allow a demon in for a moment. We're going to talk about that. Sodom and Gomorrah. And this time, for the first time, lesson 10, we're going to talk about the black church. Is there a boule or a control mechanism over the black churches that's contrary to Christ? That's right. Week 10, we're going to talk about that. These churches in our community aren't the churches of Christ at all. At all. And that's including Geno Jennings. Week 11, we're going to talk about the judgment of the nations. And last but not least, the kingdom of heaven that comes to earth will be week 12. How will the kingdom be when Christ arrives, after all evil has been put under his feet? The kingdom of heaven, the 1,000-year reign, taught for the first time when heaven comes to earth in this Hebrew and Bible Academy, and I hope to see you there. Okay? Well, brothers and sisters, that concludes our Patreon update, The War Against Our Children. Understand what's really going on ritualistically against us. And we have to save as many of our young as we can. Do not turn your children over to Moloch. With that, I'll see you on Patreon. Patreon.com/agathering144. And again, you'll have problems viewing Patreon if you have the Vimeo app on your phone or computer. Delete Vimeo app and you'll be able to see Patreon with no problem. All right? With that, we'll see you over there. Patreon.com/agathering144. We're going to open up the lines immediately on Patreon. We need to talk about this. Shalom.
Arabs and Africans told us. At gunpoint. Together our wives and children then sold us. In the belly of these great ships we traveled in fear. By the rivers of Babylon we found our brothers here. Together us in Colombia, Reuben from Australia.
Shalom.
Issachar, the Mexicans. A highest gathering is right now. Judah, the Negroes, Benjamin, the West Indians, Levi, the Haitians. A highest gathering is right now. Colombia, Reuben from Australia, Issachar, the Mexicans. That's who we be, Judah, the Negroes, Benjamin, the West Indians, Levi, the Haitians, Manasseh, the Cubans, Ephraim from Puerto Rico, and Valley from the Isles of Hawaii. The Lord is calling back Israel. Zebulon from Panama, Gad, the North American Indians, Simeon, the Dominicans. Our highest gathering is